Today we're back looking at true crime TikToks that will keep you up at night.
What is one true crime case that you just can't stop thinking about? I always wonder what really happened to 6-year-old Catherine Corzilius. On August 7th, 1996, Catherine, along with her mom Nancy and her brother Chris, were out running errands. Catherine's dad was Paul Corzilius, who at the time was the tour manager for John Bon Jovi. That day was Paul's birthday, so they were all out looking for a present for him. They all lived on Elder Circle, which is a small neighborhood near Austin, Texas. When they got back to Elder Circle, Catherine wanted to pick up the mail from the community mailbox and then walk home. The mailboxes were only about 1/8 of a mile from their home, and Catherine had done this a few times before, so her mom let her. Catherine would take the shorter route home, while her mom and brother would take the longer route around Elder Circle.
Oh, so she
This
was
way,
on her
they would be
own.
getting home at almost the same time. But once Nancy and Chris got home with still no sign of Catherine, Nancy sent Chris to go and look for her. But when Chris couldn't find her, Nancy started searching for her by car. Within minutes, they found her laying in the middle of the road on Elder Circle. She was unconscious but still breathing. According to Nancy, she didn't want to make her daughter lay on the hot pavement, so she picked her up and took her to the hospital. Little Catherine suffered from a fractured skull and never regained consciousness, and sadly, she died later that day. Authorities initially thought that Catherine was a victim of a hit and run, but certain things didn't add up. Where Catherine's body was found was in an unusual spot. Her mom last saw her walking towards their house, but her body was found a little over a mile away from their home in the opposite direction that she was supposed to have gone. Catherine's body was actually found along the route that her mom and brother took to get home, and the autopsy only deepened the mystery. The autopsy showed that Catherine didn't die from a hit and run. Along with her head injury, she also had abrasions on her left shoulder, lower back, right hip, and her knees. The ME found that Catherine had either jumped, fallen, or was thrown from a moving vehicle. One theory investigators came up with was that Catherine maybe tried to hold on to the back of her mom's car on the drive home, but fell off. This would explain the location of where her body was found. But her family did not believe this, so they hired a PI. The PI noted that it was a really hot summer day, and at the time, Catherine's left thumb was broken and in a splint, so it would have been really difficult for her to hold on to anything. And it's likely her mom would have seen her in the rearview mirror. Catherine's family believes she was abducted and murdered. After her death, investigators brought in a canine unit that tracked her scent to a vacant lot 30 yards from the mailboxes, but it was lost after that. This sparked a theory that Catherine was approached by an attacker at the mailboxes, ran into the lot, was caught and thrown into a car, struck in the head, and then was thrown out of the vehicle where she was found. Nancy also stated that it appeared her daughter's body was laid out for her to find. Her hair was smoothed down, her clothes were straight, and her sandals were still on.
So it's not like she
Unfortunately,
jumped?
there's never been any answers in this case, and it's still labeled a suspicious death. John Bon Jovi wrote a song dedicated to Catherine called August 7, 415. And sadly, in March of 2020, Catherine's brother Chris, who grew up to be a police officer, was tragically killed in a car accident.
As we were watching that video, I was starting to think maybe she was abducted and she tried to get away from the abductor by jumping out the car. They were talking about how she was lying on the ground and her hair was flat and her clothes were flat. It's as if somebody's killed her and then laid her out in the ground for her to be found. I believe this was a tragic accident. I think she tried to jump on the back of the cart and fell. Obviously she's 6, so she is very, very small. However, you would think you could see somebody hanging onto the back of the car. Was there nobody else in the area? Wouldn't somebody see a child holding onto the back of the car and maybe alert the driver? A lot of the theories make a little bit of sense, but not total sense. Something is missing. Mum seems suspicious. She found her, moved her, and brought her to the hospital herself. That's why I was thinking, wouldn't you maybe call for an ambulance? But then that was back in the 1990s, so it's not like they had iPhones. The mum could be completely innocent, or maybe she is involved somehow. But what I was piecing together is maybe she was abducted and she was trying to get away from the attacker and jumped out of the moving car. Obviously, the attacker seen that and just went, screw that, I'm leaving. But it also doesn't explain as to why her hair and clothes were flat. That's the one bit I don't get.
One of the scariest things that I've ever heard is the voicemail that Henry McCabe left his wife before he mysteriously disappeared. On the evening of September 6, 2015, Henry was partying with some friends at a club called Pavlitsky's in Minnesota. At this time, Henry's wife and 2 kids were staying with some family in California, so they weren't in town. When they were done partying, for reasons unknown, Henry's friend William dropped him off at a gas station at around 2 a.m. The following events that took place have never really been explained. At 2:28 a.m., Henry's wife gets a call from Henry, and at first it kind of seems like a pocket dial, but the sounds are literally terrifying. It sounded like he was moaning in pain, almost like growling noises, and you can't really make out what he's saying, although some believe that it sounded like he said he'd been shot. After 2 minutes of these horrifying sounds, a man yells, "Stop it," and then the call disconnects. Only part of the voicemail has ever been released. Here it is.
In the voicemail, it does sound like somebody is in extreme pain. I'm not going to play it because I don't want to put that on my channel. If you want to watch the original video, I'll link it down in the description. However, I will say the voicemail is quite disturbing.
Not long after this call, Henry also called his brother and left him a voicemail too. This time he was crying. Henry disappeared after this, and when he didn't show up for work the next day, he was reported missing to the Mounds View Police Department. At the start of the investigation, police talked with Henry's friend William, who dropped him off at the gas station that night. To their surprise, William had Henry's keys and wallet, and he says this is because he was trying to stop Henry from driving that night. William also tells the police which gas station he dropped Henry off at that night, and authorities immediately began looking for him. But after reviewing surveillance footage, it turns out that William told police the wrong gas station. Thanks to that surveillance footage, they found that William actually dropped Henry off at a Holiday gas station in the complete opposite direction in Fridley. This made more sense considering the area where his phone last pinged and sent that voicemail was in the vicinity of Creekview Park in New Brighton. So they then shifted their search area to this location, but it was like Henry vanished into thin air. There was no activity on his bank accounts, and he wasn't showing up to his job as a Department of Revenue auditor, which he loved. So that, paired with the horrifying voicemail that he left his wife that night, led authorities to believe that he was met with foul play. And even the FBI got involved. But there was literally no evidence of anything happening. There were so many searches for Henry, but every one of them turned up nothing. But then, 2 months later, someone kayaking on Rush Lake in New Brighton spotted something in the water. When police arrived, they discovered Henry's body, and he'd been in the water for quite some time. Despite his voicemail and him saying that he'd been shot, there were absolutely no signs of trauma to his body. The autopsy indicated that Henry possibly died from drowning, but as far as I can find, his manner of death remains undetermined. Some things just don't really add up in this case though, like the location of the club he was at that night, to where his phone last pinged and sent that voicemail, to where he ended up in the water. And the biggest question I have is, how did he get in the water? The gas station that he was dropped off at that night was 6 miles from the lake. Google Maps says that it would have taken him almost 2 hours to walk there, but he sent that voicemail at 2:28 in the morning, just minutes after being dropped off. If he tried to walk and got lost and just fell in the water, how did he get there so fast? And why did William drop him off at a gas station instead of his own house that night? The lake was within minutes of Henry's house, but if you remember, William kept his keys and wallet. So Henry essentially had no way of getting inside of his house, and he didn't have any identification on him if something were to happen. Those who knew Henry say he would never intentionally hurt himself. He was married for 11 years, had a job that he loved, and had 2 beautiful kids. Whatever truly happened to Henry McCabe and caused him to leave that horrifying voicemail that night remains a mystery 9 years later.
All I'm gonna say is that has got fishy and foul play written all over it. I think his friend's involved. That has to be what's went on. His friend has done something and is trying to cover his ass, but it's obviously not working. First of all, he allegedly dropped his friend off at a gas station, then told the police a different gas station, and also kept his wallet and keys. So are you just gonna drop him off there and then abandon him? Also, that voice note was so eerie, like, ugh. If you wanted to hear it, you can watch the video on TikTok. I'm not gonna put it in this video because I don't like it. It is very disturbing in my opinion. I don't know, something about that is very, very weird, and that's actually kind of freaked me out. Friend knows what happened 100%. Like, I genuinely do believe his friend is involved. Who is his friend? It just doesn't make any sense. You know, sometimes in these cases you can understand why somebody made a certain choice. That choice doesn't make any sense. You don't drop somebody off at a random gas station and keep their keys and wallet. How are they meant to get into their home if they don't have their keys? He was being tortured. Autopsy says no trauma to the body, and that's what's so weird, because in the voicemail he was talking about how he was shot, but no shot marks were found in his body. It also did kind of sound like he was maybe drowning. I don't know, maybe he took something and he was hallucinating, but that type of voicemail is just the voicemail you don't want to hear. I actually got rang earlier by somebody who I know, and I think they accidentally rang me and I went on the voicemail without them knowing, and I think it's just very, very weird how we're now watching a video about a voicemail like that. It's kind of like they're both connected somehow.
This case is going to put you off ever going solo traveling, so close Skyscanner, put down the Airbnb app. You're going to want to listen to this first. Emma Kelty was 43 years old, living in London. She worked as a teacher and was kind of feeling like she was in a rut. Now, this only got worse when her dad passed away tragically from cancer, and she kind of knew she needed to take a break, work through her grief, and kind of go and find herself. Emma was very used to solo traveling. She'd done it many times before, and she was very physically fit with a real can-do attitude.
I have always wanted to solo travel, however, I always have a fear that something's going to go wrong and I'm going to be on my own. I feel like that might be happening in this case. Basically, she's going somewhere on her own and something bad happens. If you're traveling with somebody, it's not as bad because at least you have them. If you're on your own, you're on your own.
This wasn't just a small trip though. She fully moved out of her flat and quit her job. She wanted to set herself a challenge. She was going to kayak across the Amazon River.
Oh.
And she even got some tips off another traveller she knew and spent hours planning the best possible route. She set off on her journey on the 15th of June 2017, but this trip was far from plain sailing. She kept her followers updated via social media and shared some super scary experiences that she had very early on. This included having a woman wave a machete at her.
Oh.
Now, it was pretty dangerous because Emma, like I said, was alone. She was very vulnerable.
Yeah.
And she was having to kind of dock her kayak and camp in different areas along the route. She also had 2 mobile phones, an expensive GoPro camera, and a tablet.
I'm not a professional whenever it comes to the Amazon. I swear there are tribes that live in the Amazon. And also, if you're ever going to go traveling somewhere, you have to do research before you do it. Don't just get some advice off another traveller. You don't know who could be living in that country. If you're from the UK and travel to a different part of the UK, it's not as bad. If you're traveling to a foreign country, you need to know what you're doing, especially if you're traveling on your own.
She was therefore very vulnerable to thieves. Now, eerily, in late August, a guide who met with Emma on her journey heard a rumour she'd been murdered. This news travelled back to Emma's brother in the UK, who was obviously kind of frantically then trying to get in contact with Emma. Luckily, he messaged her and she messaged back confirming that she was alive and stated, "Let's hope it's not a premonition." One of her final
really
chilling
her,
tweets
though?
was, "So in or near Coati, brackets, 100 kilometres away, close brackets, I will have my boat stolen and I will be killed too. Nice." Now, this was obviously repeating some kind of warning that she'd been given earlier in the trip. 2 days later, she was 42 days into her trip. She'd done really well, and she set up her tent when she was spotted by a gang of pirates.
Oh no.
Believing that she either had a lot of money on her or substances on her that they could steal, the gang started shooting at her. She was hit twice and was screaming in pain as she was shot in the arm. The men then kidnapped her and bundled her onto their boat. They forced her on there where they relentlessly arred her. She was also stabbed by these men multiple times, and while she was still alive, the men threw her from their boat into the piranha-filled water below. Due to this gang having stolen Emma's belongings, this enabled police to track them down fairly quickly.
One of them looks
and
young.
to be honest, the gang were pretty open and bragged about the killing. One of the gang leaders, though, had already been murdered by a rival gang by the time officers got to them. Emma's body has never been recovered, and a 17, 19 and 28-year-old have all reportedly been jailed for the murder.
And that right there is why I will never ever solo travel. I am just terrified of something like that happening to me. If you're ever going to go somewhere, please, for the love of God, research before you go there. Look at the pros and cons, you need to know them. It's even more disturbing is the fact that there's people out in the world like that. There's actual pirates like that. Honestly, poor woman, rest in peace.
It took police 7 days and over £250,000 to catch this killer.
Oh, he looks terrifying.
Caitlin, and this is double murderer James Allen.
I've never heard of this guy before, and that's freaky. It's the fact that he's living in this world after committing these crimes.
Colin Dunford was an 81-year-old man living alone in Middlesbrough. He was described as being very quiet, very kind, and a bit of a creature of habit. Every evening he would go to the Samuelsons' Workman Club and have 2 pints with his friends. When Colin didn't show up on the 21st of April 2012, initially they didn't really think anything of it. Maybe he had gone to sleep, maybe he was a bit tired that day, or maybe he just wasn't up for it. However, when he didn't show up the following evening, now the 23rd, this is when his friends got concerned. They decided to go around the corner to his house and check up on him to make sure that he was okay. And this is when they sadly discovered that their friend Colin was dead. He had been attacked, suffering from many facial wounds and head injuries. His house had been completely ransacked, and he had several things stolen from him, including his bank card. Police promptly arrived and immediately launched a murder investigation. A tip that came in from a member of the public really allowed the police to kind of focus on and narrow down on this one man who they believe had committed the murder. And this man was 36-year-old James Allen.
Terrifying.
James wasn't an unfamiliar face to law enforcement. He had a lengthy criminal record
No
with up to
surprise.
78 convictions, including things such as assault, aggravated bodily harm, and robbery.
So you have a man who's known to law enforcement, he's committed something like 78 crimes, and he's still out and about in the world. This is what is wrong. You know, when is this ever going to change? When we do these true crime videos, the perpetrator always has a long criminal history. How is somebody like him out in the world? 78 convictions. Why is he not in jail?
He had spent a lot of his adult life behind bars. In 2003, he and another offender stabbed a man 3 to 4 times in his own home while they filmed it. This man did make it to the hospital where he discharged himself but would sadly go on to die from his injuries.
Oh, there we
James would
go.
only spend 8 years in prison for this man's death, being charged with grievous bodily harm. In April 2012, when this case has taken place, James is actually staying with one of his friends as he's trying to evade police for another separate crime. James had tried to use Colin's bank card, but thankfully it didn't let him withdraw any cash. He somehow got wind that police were looking for him in connection with Colin's murder, so he dumped his bloody soaked clothes, and using a bike that he had stolen, he cycled 31 miles all the way from Middlesbrough to Whitby. He eventually dumped the bike and slept on the streets that night. The following day, he sold a gold ring to a cash converters type shop and then just kind of roamed the streets of Whitby, potentially looking for a hostel, or he could have been looking for drugs.
I've walked by so many people in the streets, and little do I know they could be like him. They literally could have just committed a crime and be on the run from the police. So this man's already a murderer, also wanted for a separate crime, and now he's committed that crime. At this point, I feel like it's all done on purpose. I feel like people like him are purposely not put into jail.
He slept on the streets again that night, and then the next day he again just kind of wandered about up until he came upon the Church Street flats. He hung around here and sort of laid in wait, waiting for someone to open their door, and sadly the first person to do so was 50-year-old Julie Davidson. Julie had actually only recently moved back to Whitby from Bolton after separating from her husband. She moved back in order to be closer to her sister and her brother-in-law named Dawn and George, but she also felt safer and happier in Whitby. Julie was described as a person who just wanted to live the quiet life. She kept herself to herself, spent her time volunteering for the St. John's Ambulance Brigade, which really reflected and mirrored the type of person she was. She was just extremely caring. When Julie opened the front door to her flat, she was ambushed by James, who forced his way inside. He would go on to stab Julie 31 times in a frenzied attack.
It could have all been avoided if he was just jailed.
Face down on her living room floor while he ransacked the house, stole many things from her, including a laptop, cash, a necklace that he would have had to literally taken off her neck, but then also some of her clothes and shoes. After this, he fled from the flat and disposed the bloody clothing, and then started wearing some of Julie's clothes that he had stolen. The following day, Julie's sister Dawn was grown worried. She and Julie had plans to go out for dinner, and when Julie wasn't answering the phone, she got worried. Together, Dawn and George travelled over to Julie's flat, where they sadly found her deceased. The doctor who performed Julie's post-mortem commented on how similar her injuries were to a post-mortem he had very recently done on a man named Colin Dunford. He stated that he believed in his professional opinion that the same person was responsible for both murders. This was alarming to police because if this murderer had been in Middlesbrough and then Whitby, slaying innocent people with the motive seemingly being burglary, where could he be now?
Exactly, where could he be? He should be behind bars, but for some reason they let him out of bars. It really grinds my gears. Like, it really irritates me because loads of these crimes could easily be avoided if the police just charged the people. How can you stab somebody 4 times and only get 8 years in jail with 78 other convictions? Like, hello?
From this, the sense of fear and urgency really intensified. North Yorkshire Police and Cleveland Police began working together to try and find their killer. Cleveland Police was already one step ahead and was able to name the man they were looking for as James Allen. Through CCTV, they were not only able to just follow James, but were able to conclusively link him to both of the murders. He had tried using Colin's bank card, he had sold the necklace that belonged to Julie, he was pictured with a laptop which was exactly like the one that had been stolen from Julie's flat, and he was also captured wearing her shoes, so for the police this was enough for them to make an arrest. The police held a press conference urging anyone who was with James or maybe hiding him to not stay loyal to him. They blasted his face and his name everywhere and just told people to be on the lookout for him. Because they were following him through CCTV, they were always just one step behind. However, they did get a break in the case when they had found out that he had caught a bus to Leeds. 7 days after murdering Colin, James was spotted just walking around Leeds city centre by an off-duty police officer. He alerted his colleagues and started just following James, not letting him leave his eyesight up until backup arrived and they managed to successfully arrest him. This was on the 29th of April 2012, and he was officially charged with 2 counts of murder. The manhunt for James was one of the biggest in the UK and cost over £250,000. His trial began at Newcastle Crown Court on the 29th of October. Throughout the trial, he was cocky, he was argumentative.
Oh, no surprise.
He would shout and he would swear, and he was told to leave several times. James genuinely thought that they didn't have anything on him, they didn't have any evidence. He thought that all of their evidence was just circumstantial. However, he was totally blindsided when they were able to put his DNA at Julie's flat from a tab book that he had dropped on the floor. After his arrogant performance throughout the trial, James fell silent when the jury delivered a guilty verdict for the murders of Colin Dunford and Julie Davison. He would go on to be sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 37 years to serve.
Knowing the way the system is, he's probably out now and could possibly murder again. You know how he purposely took the life of somebody in 2003? Imagine being a family member of that man. Your loved one's killer got 8 years in jail. He then got out, committed 78 other crimes, and then murdered 2 other people. I don't understand how it happened. Intentionally taking somebody's life should result in you never being let out of jail. He then gets out after 8 years, commits 78 other crimes. I don't get it. I don't understand it. 78 other crimes. Never heard of this case until now, and that's what's so terrifying. It's the fact that there's lots of cases like this in the UK and throughout the world. And I mean, there's a lot of bad people in this country. That poor man Colin lived a few doors away from me. So very sad, he never did anyone any harm. Always walking to the social club straight over. It does really break my heart thinking what he was feeling in his last moments. But they were let down by the justice system. How a man like him was ever let out onto the streets will forever boggle me. Called it into local CCTV, who dismissed it because the shoes were different when the police came to view the CCTV. It was confirmed it was him, he caught the bus. While dismissed because he changed his shoes, never heard nothing like it. Well, you shouldn't hear things like it, that's the thing. How is that possible? It just doesn't make any sense. Like, it quite clearly would have been him. 78 convictions, including serious charges, but still not given a lengthy sentence. People like him should be kept inside for their whole life to protect us all. We all should be protected by the system, but quite frankly, we're not. And that's what's so angering and disappointing. How the hell was he ever let out of jail? Well, anyways, guys, for leave a video there. That's some true crime TikToks. If you see me look at more true crime, let me know, definitely will. Press bigger subscribe and see you all tomorrow for another video.